So, hi everyone, how's it going? Greetings from Los Angeles, California, where I'm out here for the next week. Tembi, are you in LA?
Well, I live in LA presently, though. I'm a little north of you. Actually in the Santa Barbara area. I'm
Ah,
having my own little staycation retreat getaway, but I needed to, I wasn't getting on a plane. So I was just wherever I could drive within like an hour and a half.
yeah, those are always good. Are you writing?
Yes.
Yes, I love getting away to
Yeah.
write.
Yeah. And we can talk about that because I think travel is good for that.
Yes. Well, one of the questions will be about future endeavors. So we're here to discuss from scratch Tembi Locke's book about Sicily and grief and love and so many things. This book came to me by one of our other teammates, Carmela, I think was the one that gave it to us. We have an internal team book club. So I was looking for new reads and this one came to me and I just loved it so much that, we wanted to have you on. I found it just an incredible book about family, as well as how places around the world can, bring you through like grief as well as like change you, like I think for so many of us that are travelers, you go away and there's just one place that sort of opens up everything to you. And I mean, for you, that was Sicily. I found it a really good, I loved the dynamics. And one of the questions I will get to is about you and your mother-in-law. I think that dynamic really, I wasn't expecting that to be such a big part of the book. And then as it shifted through all the summers in Sicily and seeing your relationship with her change was really interesting. But that's a question for a little bit later. First question I always want to ask is, how did this book come to be?
Oh, wow, Matt. First of all, thank you for those kind words and that just sort of sweet and, dare I say, loving introduction to the book. And thank you for everybody for being here. I know some of you might have read it, some of you might not have read it. And so I'm always honored whenever anyone wants to sort of sit and talk about the book and has read your book. It's an honor to have anyone read your book. As we, anybody who's written a book knows that it's an honor. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jill, for showing it there on the screen. And so I am, I'm honored to be here. And so this book came to be really as a kind of offering from my heart. And I know that sounds rather lofty, but what I mean by that is about 5 years after my husband passed, and I was sitting in Sicily. Actually, it was 3 years. It was the third year mark. I was sitting in Sicily one summer, and I looked around. It was like, the sun was setting. It was after siesta, but before dinner. And we were sitting on my mother-in-law's street and my daughter was playing. My mother-in-law was hanging laundry. And I was just sitting there and I thought, how the heck did I get here? Like, how did I get here? And the question was so big because for me, the person who connected the three of us, my daughter, my mother-in-law, and myself, was no longer with us, my late husband. And yet we were there together, forging family across language, across culture, across race, across education, across like all the borders that we as societies erect, right? And I thought, that might be a story worth telling. And then I quietly put the idea away because I didn't feel at the time that I was really capable of writing a book or that I was really ready or knew how to take on that endeavor. So 2 more years went by where I was tinkering and thinking and sort of shaping it in my mind and continuing to write on my own. And then the 5th year hit, the 5th anniversary of my husband's passing. And I thought, if I don't do this now, I think I'm going to suffer a greater loss. And I felt as though I knew that the world was continuing to change. My life was continuing to change. My daughter was continuing to grow. And I felt that if I didn't document the story then as it was, and I'm going to say something that I don't usually talk about on in these conversations because they're not always travel people. But the other thing is that I realized Sicily was also changing. And the Sicily that I knew, the Sicily that I loved, that I'd been coming to for many, many years was changing. And I felt as though, and the elders in the community were transitioning. And I felt as though there was value in documenting this particular time. And so that's really where the book came to be. So it's both kind of like my love of Sicily, my love of this family I had created, as well as a desire to share back some of what I'd been given and what I'd learned.
Did you take notes? Because there were so many details over like the course of the book, from your time as a student, your time living in New York. I mean, just your whole life together. That, I mean, my memory is not that great. So like there were just so many, from the smells and the sounds. Did you keep a journal throughout your life?
Yeah, so I've journaled since I was a teenager, and I won't say that I'm someone who journals every day. I mean, I can go months and never look at a journal, right? And then I'll find my way back, and there might be months when I write a lot, and then but I had when I sat down to write, I knew that. And by the way, let me back up and say I had been taking writing classes through UCLA Extension for a while, mostly for my own creative expression. So I had all of those writings. I had journals from dating back to when I was, a college student. I'm someone who loves letters and paper and like those kind of archival things. So I actually even have letters people wrote me in high school. Yes, Marie Kondo, the tidy it up person, she would hate me because like I have all the things that she tells people to get rid of. But for me, they have a value, right? And certainly as a memoirist, they have extra value because they're the tools that I can craft story from. So I used journals, I used letters, I used photographs a great deal. I would go back to images from, 2000, and I would look and see what was I wearing, what was in the background. I would go and listen to music from that era because music would remind me of certain events from my life. So I was really, I had a kind of a writer's toolbox to help bring forward those memories and render them as precisely and as immediately and as richly as I could.
Hmm. When I was writing my book, 10 Years of Nomad, I had to remember 10 years of travel. And I was very thankful that I had a blog to like refer to, but also I kept that journal because you're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Yep. We do, because memory is like that, especially if there's trauma or loss or grief. Our minds, I mean, the way our brain, with the way we are wired to sort of forget things, to pass through them, to sort of push the trauma to the side or the event. And so you have to be very conscientious and intentional to go back and access those memories, those moments, because our mind has a way of kind of distancing us from them.
Yeah, definitely true. You had mentioned a few moments ago that this idea of the book came to you while you were sitting in Sicily and thinking about language and cultures and people across time. When you sat down to write this book, was that like your first goal, or was it more about a remembrance of Saro? Like what was the writing process for this book like?
Yeah.
Knowing that you're like, I have something here, but how do I get it into this narrative?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for asking that. And it's a kind of a complex question because it was a complex process. I won't, I won't lie, because I realized that I wasn't writing this is a straight love story, meaning between my late husband and myself. I also knew it was a love story about a place. I also knew it was a love story about a relationship with my mother-in-law. I also knew it was a love story about motherhood and my daughter. And so that complexity scared me initially as a new writer, because I thought, can I weave all of those storylines together into one cohesive narrative? And at first I thought, let me just take it, as they say, piece by piece, sentence by sentence. And so what I did was, the book begins with the core love story, which is the love of my late Saro, my late husband. And I knew I had to anchor readers in who he was, in what the kind and quality of our relationship was, and what he meant to me. That without sort of anchoring the reader right there from the very beginning, at the beginning of the book, nothing else really mattered. You didn't care why I was in Sicily. You wouldn't really be interested in, it's just like, oh, a meet cute, like rom-com, like they met, so I thought, I have really got to make him a character, make people fall in love with him the way I fell in love with him. And I thought, if I could get over that, if I could achieve that first, that hurdle as a writer, right, crafting that then I could take them on these other journeys that emerged because of that original love story. And so the writing process was, in terms of creatively assembling that, was very intentional. I did kind of outline. I mean, I had a proposal, I had outlined it. I thought about what the love themes were throughout the book. And sometimes when I would write and I would get stuck in a place, maybe writing about grief or writing about something I couldn't quite remember and I needed to do a little more research, I would switch to something I knew a lot about. And I would write about something that was very immediate, like food. I could always come back to food. Was like my sort of benchmark. Like whenever I get lost in the narrative, I would like bring it back to food, because food was so incredibly essential. Food was so alive, so visceral, such a love language in and of itself. And I knew I needed to anchor the reader again, like almost in the body, right? In this sensual experience of eating a new dish in a foreign place. And what did that mean? And so that's my process. When I would get stuck or not unsure, I would bring it back to what I knew and give it a little rest, a breather, and then I'd come back to the more difficult parts.
That's a good way to write. Because there is so much there that I always think one of the struggles in writing is, how do you make the story interesting, right? How do you weave it all together so people want, to pick it up and just get really wrapped into that story right away?
You're so right, Matt. You're so right. I mean, I have I'm blessed that I have a sister who's also, she's a novelist, she's a writer, and she's a crime mystery writer. And I benefit a lot from her books because she's a page turner, like everything's a page turner. And I'm like, how do you do that? How do you like propel the story forward and make the reader want to keep getting invested in? And she said something really wise. And if there's any writers in our Zoom today or people who are interested in this, she says, every story is a crime story. And I was like, what? What do you mean by that? And she said, every story, there's some crime that happens at the beginning. It could be a crime of the heart. In my case, was losing my husband. I thought it felt like a crime of the heart, right? And that if you start there, that then you have to figure out the how-to from there. And that becomes the thing that people get invested in across all the pages. So I don't know if that's an anecdotal little bit of writing craftsmanship that was shared with me, that I thought like, oh, for me, how do I make the reader love Sicily the way I love Sicily? Like that is like, some days that would just be my mission. Like, I love this place so much. And like, how do I make the reader who's never been there, like doesn't understand the language, is going to be like, how do I make them love this place and understand it empathetically? Not from like, I don't like objectifying a place. Right. I'm the foreigner who comes in and like, I figured this whole place out. It's this, 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 and this, and this. No, it's not. I could live in Sicily from now to the end of my days and still not understand it all. The same way I can live in America every day and still not understand it all. You can't, and so if you own that initially, when you're writing about place, in particular, a place that you weren't born into, I think you have to come at it with a lot of empathy and openness and bring your reader on that journey of your discovery of that place.
In your book, you share a lot of personal details,
Mm.
pregnancy, difficulties, sexual experiences,
Mhm.
death, conversations with family members, the feelings about being an outsider. I mean, as you say many times, there's Italian culture and then there's Sicilian culture. Was this a difficult decision as you wrote the book as to like how much are you going to share, or did it just all spill out and just sort of seem natural to include? I think it's always, personal books like this are always very interesting in the sense that it's, being a writer is very much about like bleeding onto a page, and sometimes that's difficult and sometimes you don't know how personal to get versus like just keeping a little bit behind.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And it's a real essential question because, memoir by its very nature is an intimate look into a real person's lived experience, who's lived through it, whatever that event is that they are writing about in their memoir. And they are writing, or we are writing, with the purpose of connecting to other people who have had similar experiences and those who haven't, to say that this too is a part of the human experience, right? So there's a kind of honesty that comes to the genre, right? You don't write a memoir to hide behind anything. Otherwise, you could fictionalize the whole story. And by the way, there were many times when I thought, yeah, I could just fictionalize this and make, but I thought, because it also is rooted in grief, I didn't want to hide behind that. I wanted to lay that experience bare because I knew that as a grieving person, I had turned to many people's memoirs to understand what that experience was like for someone else so that I could better understand my own. And so I felt, and I'll share that Wild, Cheryl Strayed's book, which is another kind of a travel book, but also a grief book, really was a model for me. I mean, when I read that book, it changed my life because it changed my life as a writer, because I thought, holy moly, what did she do? How did she do that? And two, it changed my life as a grieving person because it helped me to see for the first hand. Then I understood what I was doing in Sicily in a strange way. I was like, oh, I'm on my own kind of pilgrimage, right? I'm moving through this, except I'm not on a trail on the Pacific coast. I'm in a small remote village town in Sicily. And so that was very powerful to me. So when I sat down to write, and she was very honest in that book. Great memoirs they're very honest. So my rule to myself was write it all first. Just write it as I remember it, write it as honestly and as powerfully as I possibly can. Step away from it, and then decide, do I want to include it? And is it worthy of, because not everything you remember, not everything is worthy of being a part of the final sort of craftsmanship of the whole tapestry. And there were sections that I really wrestled with. I mean, I wrestled hard with like, do I include this or not? And in fact, one of those areas is the whole chapter on my husband's final night, our final time together. That was really not only hard for me to write, as you can imagine, but I struggled with the intimacy of that. And could readers handle it? Could I handle it? Was it okay? And ultimately, it's become the section of the book that people come to me about so often, and they say, thank you for that honesty. I know that experience. I have witnessed that experience. So I'm grateful I did that. And there are some other parts of the book you said around like, my 20-year-old self, my 25-year-old self, sort of all of that. I was like, oh my gosh. But I knew I had to like be honest, I mean, I was in my 40, I was 45 or so when I started writing the book. So I'm like, I can't just skip over that. I was a sexual person in my 20s, and like that's a part of life too. And of course, when when the book was done and I got the galley of it and it arrived in the mail, I was like, what the heck have I done? This is all in print and it will never go away. I was like, send this book back, burn it, and don't ever put it on a bookshelf, because I'm scared, I'm terrified, because now like it's there. But I read that many writers go through this, memoirists go through this, and those feelings, those fear, that vulnerability is a part of the process. And you just take a breath, say, there's nothing that I've experienced that someone else hasn't been through. I am not some unique unicorn in the world that like I'm the only one this has ever happened to. We are all human and we've all had moments. I just was honest and wrote about mine.
I was going to ask what you cut, and you just kind of just mentioned that. But going to what you're saying about you have this book and it's there or it's not, has your family, did your mother-in-law get a translated copy? Did your sister-in-law, did your daughter, did she go, Mom, I don't want to know about those things? Like, what was your reaction from it from your friends and family?
Yeah, so friends and family with memoirs is a whole subject. I mean, there's whole classes on like how to handle that if you're writing about your family or close friends. So there were two or three select people that I let read an early manuscript, right? And so mostly it wasn't for their approval. It was more because there were certain events that they had witnessed, and I wanted to make sure that my memory, my recollection wasn't way off, right? I didn't think it was, but I tried to hold my feet to the fire, to the truth of the experience. And it was important for me to share that. And in the process, they read about themselves. So it was like a two-pronged thing. Like I knew if there were anything that like might bother them, it was like, speak now or forever hold your peace, because this is going forward, right? So there was that. Regarding my Italian family, the book, I did not translate my own book, and it was certainly not translated early in the manuscript stage. So I told them about it. I told them everything that was in the book, why I put it in the book. I shared the parts that were tender to us, the like inflection points of tension we'd had along the course of the arc of our relationship. And I told them that the point of writing about this is not to sort of air any familial dirty laundry. The point of writing about this is to say, look what we've done. We started here and look where we are now. I think other people might want to know about that because maybe they want to do the same thing with their family. And so from that place, I felt like I'm celebrating this love that we have, right? And that kind of gave me permission. I think if people understand the intention of what you're doing, and they're saying I'm choosing for us to all be honest. And there were people whose names I changed for privacy reasons. Clearly you do that. The ways in which I distanced the reality from the way it's rendered in the book, keeping the truth. Like, so I might change like certain events of their life. And that, of course, when they read it, they were like, that's me. I was like, okay, but the world doesn't need to know, and then with my daughter, because she was a child when I was writing it, I knew that it was not appropriate at all for her to read this book. It's not age appropriate. It's of no interest to her. She's like, what child wants to crawl inside of the psyche of their mother and like hang out there for 300 pages? No way. Boring, awful. She was in no way interested in that. But what I did was I took her on a mother-daughter weekend before the book came out, and I read aloud the sections to her that pertained to her origin story and her that pertained to her, so that she could hear firsthand from me what was going to be in the world. And if she had questions and she wanted to talk about it. And and I guess, and if you don't want, if you want me to stop at any point, I can stop. Like it's very important, I think, when writing about a child or as a mother, what was important to me at least was to give her the space to experience it in her own way and in her own time. To my knowledge, she has not read the book cover to cover, and I told her she never has to. Like literally, she could go her whole life and never read this book. That is completely fine. Like not a big deal,
My
and
parents would have taken your advice on my book.
but yeah. Well, my dad, I think it took him a long time to read the book, and I was like, okay. And then he was like, and I think I'm sure there's some parts he was like, get that over with. I don't care about. I don't want to. As a father, he was probably cringing, but he got through it and he gave me a thumbs up. So that's. I mean, it's unique to, I think, every person, every memoirist story, their story is unique to them, and how they choose to handle it with family is very intimate. And of course, the book was done with love, and that's what I keep coming back to. It was done as an act of love, and I think it's been received as such, and that's been really wonderful to me, because I was scared about that.
Wonderful. Yeah. I totally know. I have friends in my book, and names have been changed, but they're like, that was me.
Yeah.
It's like, before we open it up to questions from the audience, I have two final questions. First question is, when you were done with this book, what do you want people to get from this book? Right? Like, you've written your story, it's love of people and place, and grief, but I always wonder, like, if you could distill it all to, like, here's the message of the book. What do you feel as if your message is?
Yeah, I think there's a central message and then a secondary message. The central message is that we are bigger and greater than any border, any barrier of language, of age, of race, of education, and our capacity for love supersedes all of that. It just does. And I hope that readers take that from the book and look at their own lives, because there's nothing like I had some extraordinary events happen along the way, but the kind and quality of my life is fairly pedestrian. There's a lot of eating, a lot of loving my family. And there's not, I didn't go to the moon, right? I didn't try. It's a simple story of family and the ways in which we are more similar than not. And the second thing I would hope readers would take away from the book is an understanding that their grief is honored and true and real, and is a part of the human continuum of grief, because we will all experience it at some point in life, and that you're not alone. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was I wanted some kind of documentation of that experience for myself, because I felt like in my one story was everybody's story. Just like when I read other people's story that was their story, I saw my story in it. And I wanted to add to that conversation around what grief can look like, and what traveling to your Sicily. And by the way, someone asked me, did you write the book because you want everybody to get on a plane and go to Sicily? And I was like, if they do, great. That's wonderful. That is not the reason I wrote the book, because the book is really about maybe inviting people to find what the Sicily in their life is, right? Sicily was that place for me that I could take a breath, where I could find parts of myself that were harder to access when I was in my just regular life in LA, going to Trader Joe and pickup and carpool line and auditions and all of that stuff, right? And so I think everybody has to have a Sicily in them. And maybe you don't need even a plane to get there, but it's like, what is that place for you?
Beautiful. What is my Sicily? I'm gonna have to think about that. But yeah, I like that concept. I've been thinking a lot about, when you grow up, your family always goes to one place for summer vacation. And I think that's the same kind of concept, right? You just have that's the family Sicily, but then we lose that. And I think as we get older, actually, that was actually a really good idea. Why don't I have the one to every July?
Yeah. And it's interesting because the pandemic has certainly changed things. And I'm curious, that tradition has been interrupted for us. I mean, no doubt about it. It's been interrupted. I mean, and I long for it and I miss it with me and my daughter, just having that time. Right. But we'll get back there, and I do think you're right. Those traditions are really, really, really wonderful. It's interesting to go to a same place, especially a place like Sicily, in the interior of Sicily, right? Which is different than the coast. The going to the interior where things are largely unchanged, like year to year, decade to decade, they're not radically different. So for me, returning to a place that's more or less the same, but I'm returning a different person each year, becomes a way to reflect, right? Because something is different and you go, oh, okay. And that's what I think you mean about the family vacation, because you're 7 when you go, then you're 10, then you're 15, then you're 20, and you're oh, this place is the same, but I'm different. And I don't know, I just think there's something really beautiful about that over the course of our lives.
Yes, yeah. The lake is always the same, but
now
you can go into the deep end. Nancy actually asked my last question. So I'm sorry, Nancy, to steal it from you. But I did want to know, is Nonna still around? Did she ever get to know that this book exists?
Yes. So Nonna passed away just before we all went into lockdown, and not from COVID, but just age and health issues. So it was hard because we weren't able to be with her at that time. And then right afterwards, we weren't able to go because the whole world went on lockdown and Italy was in a tailspin in the early days of the pandemic. However, she definitely knew about the book. She got to see the book. She got a copy of the book in English, so she couldn't read it, of course. And the funny story that I really love to tell is, so when the book was named a Reese's book club pick, so Reese Witherspoon's book club pick, which is a big deal. Woo, thank you, Reese, which brought the book to many readers. I share. So Reese went on social media, Instagram, and she held the book up and she was, announcing it. Right. And so I showed this picture to my mother-in-law. Classic Nonna. She's who's that lady holding a picture of my son? She had no idea who Reese Witherspoon was or cared. She's like, who's that lady? Why is she holding a picture of my son? And I died. I was just like, this is the best thing ever. And it's so humbling and it just keeps it real. Just keeps it real. That, and so what has happened since then is many of the neighbors on her street not the older women that I write about in the book, but their granddaughters, most specifically, and daughters, have read the book because they read in dual languages. So they've read it in English. It comes out in Italian this coming summer. So it's going to come out in Italian. In September, it comes out in Italy. So it hasn't even been translated yet into Italian. But some of the granddaughters and daughters on the street have read it in English, and the best compliments I've gotten is they've said, you captured her so fully. You captured the street. You captured us. Thank you so much for this loving portrayal of our town.
Yeah, she was, I loved how your relationship with her developed, I love, when her and your father-in-law come over and they just bring all this food and you're like, how'd they get this through customs? And, and then it seems like every summer she's sort of, you can see like your relationship grows until the end. She's like, you're going to the lawyers. And you're like, what? And then she sort of shows you where her, like, when I get sick, like, here's the clothes all ironed and everything, It's like a slow acceptance of you as her family.
Yes. She's a powerful woman, and I feel so blessed to have had her as a mother later in life, right? I never thought, like, she was she taught me so much about life and family and love. And I'm forever indebted to who she was and her heart. And I mean, I just get emotional. I miss her beyond. Like I miss our conversations. I miss like the gossip in town. I miss like her irreverence, I miss her practicality. She could just cut through it, and I would call her with all my stuff, right? And she would just like, do this, keep it simple. And that was a lovely gift. She was just a gift.
Beautiful. Well, sorry, Nancy, I took your question, but we're going to open it up to more questions. So maybe have some others. Erica will moderate. We unmute you because we're such a small group. So that way, it's a conversation. So just make sure that as we unmute you, there's no other ambient background noise or anything.
Tembi, just like as I was reading this book with chills and tears, I feel like this whole talk was chills and tears and so many more nuggets of just wisdom and beauty. And so I feel very grateful that you came on to share with our community. And so we do have quite a few questions, so let's try to keep them short so we can answer a bunch of them. But Nancy, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll ask one, Erica, because I think I've already written 4 or 5 in there. Which one did I ask first? Tembi, thank you so much for this book. I'm gonna cry because it was so amazing. It's the first time I've honestly read a novel and broke down, like just page after page. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Which one did I ask, Erica, the first one? Oh, about a Luminusa.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to go there? Like, I feel like you described it so well that I need to go.
Well, you certainly can go to Alaminusa. It will always be there. It is there. If you blink, you will miss it. So I can't say it's a big destination spot. It's literally like you go and you say, oh, okay. And you are, 2 turns of the head and you've seen it all.
Okay.
So I wouldn't go if you're traveling all the way to Sicily and your goal is to experience Sicily. I wouldn't encourage you to, go off your plan to just go see it, because you might be like, oh,
no,
that was really,
I don't think so.
I think its meaning is in me. But if you do go, definitely have a coffee at the central bar,
right.
or a glass of water, whatever. Stop there. There's 2 now. They kind of rival each other, but there's 2. And take pictures and lovely people. People will
Yeah.
say hello. It's a little different now with COVID. I will say I was there this past summer briefly because we were filming in Sicily. I didn't share, but the book is being adapted or has been adapted and will be on Netflix as a limited series this September.
Wow.
So you'll get to see a cinematic version of the story on screen, which differs in a lot of ways from the book, but holds to the emotional truth of the book. And so
Is there a hotel, Tembi, in
Are you in-
no, there's not. There's not a hotel.
No. Okay.
There's not a
Are
hotel.
you in the show?
I'm sorry?
Do you play yourself in the series?
No, I don't play myself. Zoe Saldana plays me.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
You get to
Yeah.
meet Zoe Saldana?
I worked with her every day. Yes, exactly.
Wow. I'm
Yep.
a huge fan of her work. She's
Yeah, and she does a
amazing.
beautiful, beautiful job in the series. I think people are going to, it's going to bring the book and the story to a whole new audience. And I'm sure there'll be many, obviously, viewers who've never read the book, and that's fine. But I mean, you guys will know we'll be in the, we're like the readers are like the core audience. But yeah, no, she does a beautiful, beautiful job. And a new actor. His name is Eugenio Mastrandrea. He's a big name, big Italian name, Eugenio Mastrandrea. He plays my late husband, and he is amazing. And together they are amazing. And I just feel incredibly honored that and humbled that any of this is happening. It's kind of surreal.
My cousin wrote the book You.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that Netflix show, like I can't go anywhere without going, Kepnes. Are you related to that Caroline? I always say, no, it's a very common name where I'm from. Like,
Yeah, it's well, you know what, speaking of that, what we did, and you guys, because of the conversation we've just had here about the book, you will understand what I'm going to say next, which is that for the series, we changed the characters' names. Because what I wanted to do, my child is a child, and I know what I know about television, which is when you adapt something, you've got to make it spicier, bigger, more dramatic, and than even the book is, right? And so I knew it would have to veer, some things would be created and made up and not true to the actual lived events. And I didn't want my daughter to be walking down the street getting ice cream one day and be like, and hear her name and be like, so we changed all the names. My parents are very happy we changed the names because I also didn't want my parents to be like, what is this? We didn't do any of that. Why are those characters doing that? That's not us. And so when we changed the names, it allowed us to really let the story breathe the way it needs to breathe on screen. So there's going to be some new things that are not in the book and which are made up. And then there's some things that are completely true and happened. And that's what, adaptation is. And so you'll get to see it this September.
That's beautiful. We do have a question about spirituality from Jill. Jill, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I wondered if you had a source of faith, as in like God and church, and I think some sort of established, and I think I started thinking about that in the scene, which is one of my favorites, where you were talking to your friend, and Saro was not in good shape, and she said, you need to either leave or choose to stay, and if you choose to stay, give it your all. I loved that part. And that's when I started thinking, so where is she getting her strength from to move forward like that?
Oh, thank you for that question.
And you must have been surrounded by Catholicism in Italy.
Yes, totally, which was completely foreign to me because I was not raised Catholic. So my parents were raised, as you know, in East Texas. And so there was like a Methodist and a Baptist religious war going on there, right? Between those two denominations. And then I go to Sicily, and my mother-in-law is Catholic. And who didn't understand what a Methodist or a Baptist was, because she's like, is that Christian? What is that? She was like, I just know Roman Catholic. So I was like, okay, wow, the spectrum of Christianity is vast and broad, right? But I was raised in those traditions. So I definitely have a Christian background, although I didn't grow up going to church every Sunday at all. And I think, and as an adult, what I have found, for me personally, is I love tenets and the ritual that is of all the Judeo-Christian faiths. Like, I light candles every Friday, and I am not Jewish, but I do, because I feel as though it anchors me. And I think that ritual and tradition is very powerful. And I have friends who practice the Sabbath, and they do that. And I've been invited to be a part of that process. And I thought, this is incredible. This is a beautifully anchoring way to like move through the world. I love Easter, and not because of the Easter eggs, but I love the resurrection story, because I think that the resurrection story is a very powerful metaphor that, whether you're a Christian or not, you can take from that story. So I have a mosaic of religious practices that are borrowed from different traditions that largely live in the Judeo-Christian traditions. But I really think my spiritual faith, I have found, is also in nature. Nature is, to me, the generative the creator spirit. And I don't mean that in a gendered way. It's just the creative spirit, that is the organizing principle behind all of it. I find that in nature, and there is nothing that will ground me more quickly, open my heart more fully, humble me, inspire me to be better, to live more lovingly, than to put myself in nature.
Love that. I'm going to ask a question for Pam, who had to get off, but she was wondering about the background of the cover photo and what that story was.
Oh yeah, so the cover photo is my actual wedding in Florence. I had no idea what the book cover would be, and my editor at a certain point asked me to send over. We knew it would be a photograph and like not an illustration, and so she said, "Well, send me some photos that you have." And I love to take pictures. Have taken pictures my whole. So I had a ton of like Sicily pictures, and I was like, I don't know, is the cover like? So I sent like some food stuff. I sent some like sort of panoramic geography pictures, and then I just threw some pictures in of me and Saro, right, just to mix it up. And they sent back different samples, and then they finally were like, we feel like there's something else. And I was going through my wedding, I was like, let me just send this one. When they put it on the cover, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I got the chills. And the one thing I will say about that book cover that is so tender to me is, one, how it came about. I didn't pick it. They kind of picked it for me. But when I look at it now and I see my 25-year-old self, that was on my 25th birthday, that picture was taken. And I'm sitting on the bicycle, and Saro is whispering in my ear. And when I look at that cover now, the book's been out, the events that surrounded the book have passed, I feel as though he is still whispering in my ear that he is with me. So the book's cover has a new meaning that I could have never known that day. The photographer on my 25th, on a wedding day, like took that picture. I had no idea that that picture would have this kind of meaning for me now. Right. And so that when I go out into the world and I talk about the book, he's right there with me. And that gives me comfort. So that's the story of how the book cover came to be. And it's very personal to me, and it's beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. I'm gonna end with one last question. Just do you go back to Sicily yearly? What happened to the house?
Yeah. So yes, yes and no, COVID. So we're figuring that out. And this summer, my daughter is doing an art program. So she's studying art on the East Coast all summer. So we're trying to figure out, like, do we have time to, that's the other thing. Life changes. She's not 7 or 8 or 10 anymore, where I could be like, this is what we're doing. Let's go. It's like melding, all the mothers are nodding, right? Or like, oh yeah, you're in that stage of life. So I don't know about this summer if we will be going. The house is there. It's closed up. We visited the house last summer. Franca, my sister-in-law, opened the house for us so that we could go in it and have because we hadn't been there since Nonna was alive. And we spent, an afternoon in the house and just touching things and just being in her energy. She also left something for us on the table, which is something I'm going to write about, which was only Nonna would think to do that because she knew we would be coming back. So that was a gift. And then, and so the house is there. And, the way land ownership goes, as soon as my daughter turns 18, the house will revert to her and like my sister-in-law. The land is mine. There's all the laws around like land in Sicily is its own thing, but it's there, and it's there anytime we want it, and to go and spend time. And I look forward to that. And it's I look forward to that.
Love that. Before we end, I would just love to ask everyone, if you feel comfortable, can you smile and can we take a screenshot of this lovely event? And I just wanted to shout out Lisa and her father, who was born in Italy right here.
Hello.
Come state? Come sta lei?
I'm Italian to the core.
I can tell. I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh, what wisdom you have, what experience you have to share with us. Wow.
I'm a contadino.
Oh, bellissimo, bellissimo. I
Di
contadini
Abruzzo.
di Abruzzese. Okay.
I loved your story. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, thank you. Okay, you have made my day. Now I'm done. I'm going to go cry.
Very quickly, I took my father at age 91 to visit his family and his farmhouse. And your book came out. That was in 2019, right after that. And I didn't know Saro's story. I only knew the food and family. And I went to the DMA for your talk. And I bought the book and I met you.
Oh my gosh.
I read the book, and then when it came out on audio and you were the narrator, I listened to it. And then I rescued my father from assisted living in New York.
Okay, this story.
And a month after, I had him listen to your story. I even have him on video giving a critique. I'll send it to you.
Oh, please do. If you send it to Erica and Matt, maybe they can forward it to me. This is beautiful. Oh, I'm
anyway,
so
I came over when I was 9 years old. And in order to honor your heritage a little bit way back, I played baseball and I faced Satchel Paige. He struck me out on 3 pitches.
Okay, you need to write your father's story. This is a story. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm honored. Thank you so much. This has made my day. This is the gift of being a writer. Like I had no idea.
Well, anyway, my name is Costantino Ricci.
Oh, Costantino Ricci, che bel nome che ha. Che bel nome.
Well, I love your story. And
Thank you.
I really, well, I appreciate that you appreciate my Italian heritage and everything else concerning Italy. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
only lived there. I loved your story, and I lived in Italy only 9 years, but it has governed every phase of my life. So I appreciate your appreciation for Italy. I loved your book. I love Florence, and I love you.
Well, I have a crush on you, so there we go.
I'm pretty sure we have travel writers in the midst of us, and I'm pretty sure that's the highest praise you could get for an outsider writing about another country that's not your own.
It is. It truly, truly is. And one of the things that I wanted to do very intentionally, right? Because so much of Italy is one of those places that people think they know everything about, or they've seen, or they have some like Americanized understanding of it. And I just thought, no, I'd like to offer a different point of view and shed light in places that maybe people haven't thought about or spent time or are familiar with. And even just the way someone said to me recently, thank you for writing an Italian man who was loving and grounded and not full of patriarchy and machismo, and that, you know, he did the cooking and was loving and all. She said, because that's the men I know.
Yeah.
So.
All right, let's take that picture before we get more
Okay, yes, let's take
teary-eyed. 1, 2, 3. Lovely.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, this has been a joy. This is a loving and an amazing group. So, Matt, thank you for your beautiful community, for creating this community, for inspiring so many people. And for inviting me to be on this part of the book club. Just a true honor. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you for being here. And thank you everybody for being